Hello and welcome to this walking tour of the Akerselva River in Oslo. My name is Emma and I'll be your guide today. We begin this walk in the neighbourhood of Nydalen. Nydalen was first mentioned in history in 1578 when a farm called Nygårdsdalen, meaning the valley belonging to the farm Nygård, was mentioned in documents. The area didn't see major growth until the late 19th century when the banks of the river were sold off and industrial buildings were constructed. The first type of industry in Nydalen were sawmills, but later the textiles industry came here and then the iron industry. At the time, Nydalen was relatively isolated from Christiania, so it was important to build a community here. The workers were therefore very closely tied to the factory. For example, between 1857 and 1905, there was a school for children who also worked at the factory, and then from 1876 the companies financed their own midwives. When the tram came here in 1902, people began to move further away and commute to work. Today the neighbourhood is very modern with residential buildings, commercial and service establishments, shopping malls, eateries and corporate offices. The BI Norwegian Business School is located here, and since the opening of the metro in 2003, a lot of people have been attracted to the area. I am now walking alongside the factory called Akerselva. So this was a mill established in 1811 by Hans Nilse Hauge, a famous Norwegian preacher and founder of the Haugian movement. He had just been released from prison after preaching illegally, and he was given the nearby farm Bakkehaugen from his brother. Quick side note, the Haugian movement is fascinating. It is definitely worth reading. It has been very influential in Norwegian Lutheranism. Hans Nilsen Hauge sounds like a fascinating character, being imprisoned 14 times for preaching around Norway and for his radical views. But a lot of people who followed his religion, they actually started a lot of mills and factories and shipyards. So he was very influential, especially around the Akerselva River. Maybe that's why he ended up coming here. In the play Peer Gynt by Henrik Ibsen, the character Solveig, she is actually presented as a member of a Haugian family, and the Haugian movement influenced the US a lot. Anyway, back to the walking tour of the Akerselva River. He had a dam and mill built on the property and did well, selling the mill in 1824. For a while, Bakkemøller was owned by Peter Larsen & Co. and was important for Nydalen. Eventually, the mill was taken over by Christiania Spigerverk, which we'll talk about later. They wanted the waterfall that was located at Bakkemøller. The building that we just passed, it became a storage building, and today it is used by the local government as offices. We are now passing by one of the remaining buildings of a company called Christiania Spigerverk. So Christiania was the old name of Oslo. Christiania Spigerverk was established in 1853, and they created various metal products, but mostly nails. By the end of the 19th century, there were 50 nail machines operating here. The factory was built over the river to utilize the hydropower. After World War I, the company expanded to produce things like steel. Christiania Spigerverk then merged with a company called Elkem in the 1970s. At the time of the merger, Christiania Spigerverk had 4 divisions, 4,500 employees, and operations at 19 different production sites in 13 counties in Norway. Around 2,000 people worked at the factory here in Nydalen. The nail business was discontinued in Nydalen in the 1990s, and only a couple buildings remain.
Om man egentlig, hvis man ikke vil gå tilbake, jeg skal snakke med noen.
We are now seeing this yellow building up on the hill, and this is one of the old buildings from Christiania, then now Oslo, of course, is water source. So due to pollution, Christiania's water intake was moved to Maridalsvannet, which is the lake that feeds the river way, way at the top, in 1867. This increased so much pressure that a reduction pool had to be built where we are now. It is located at the top of the hill above the playground. Upstairs is a watchtower that is now a kindergarten. I am now walking halfway across the Jerusalem Bridge so we can get a view of the silos that used to belong to a company called Bjos and Vossamøller. So the bridge is 14 meters above the river, so you'll see it's quite high, but it has these amazing views out to the river. So the silos, they were owned by the company Bjos and Vossamøller, which was established in 1884. By the way, I hope I'm saying that correctly. The silos are from 1939. The company used the river for power until 1967. The mill also had 60 horses that transported grain and flour between the mills and the city. So we are now passing the factory that belonged to Lilleborg Fabrikker. So you can sort of see it behind the trees from where I'm walking. It is possible to actually take a detour across the river and you can walk into the old courtyard that belonged to the factory. So since 1712, soap has been boiled here. Lilleborg Fabrikker was established by a man called Ludvig Marabou in 1812 as a clothing factory. The factory was established in the old Jerusalem paper mill from the latter half of the 18th century. The mill was bought by Marabou in 1812 and he wound up in the mill operation and instead established a clothing factory called Lilleborg Fabrik. Eventually they built an oil mill and a byproduct of the oil was soap. So in 1842 the soap factory was established. The company was sold in 1862 to a man called Peter Wessel Vind Kildal, who focused the company on the oil mill and the soap factory. He grew Lilleborg to be one of the most important companies in Norway. In 1987, the production of household goods, such as soap of course, was moved to a town called Ski, and it is still produced there today. I am now in a park area called Mirrorlacka. So this has always been a popular place for kids to play and swim. The valley is shaped like an amphitheatre because huge amounts of clay were excavated here for making bricks. Akerselva has had many brickworks, and the business was seasonal. The bricks were mined in the summer and the clay was burned at high temperatures. Under the round mound at the bottom of the amphitheatre is the factory chimney buried. Like you'll see, there's this mound that looks like a burial mound, and they have put the chimney of the factory in this mound. It's very Viking-esque. At the top of Mirrorlacka is English-style workers' housing that was completed in 1914. By the way, we are now in a neighbourhood called Sorgene, a district about 3 kilometres or 2 miles north of the city centre. Today it is one of the most attractive areas to live in Oslo, but 150 years ago there were lots of factories here. From pre-Christian times there was a farm here, and a monastery called the Nonneseter Monastery owned the land here in the medieval times. Christian IV laid out the area as urban land in 1629, and ever since then it was a place known for industry, sawmills, factories, and so on. So we are now coming up to the remains of a building called Mirens Verksted. Actually, you will see some of the buildings. It is one of Akerselva's pioneer companies. It was known as the, quote, factories factory because it made and repaired machines for other companies. Today the building is used by NRK, which is the Norwegian public broadcaster. It also has a film school in there, it has a dance studio, and it has cafes and, artsy buildings. Lots of production companies for film and TV as well. We can now see the elephant statue, which is one of the highlights of walking down the Akerselva River. So from the beginning of the 17th century, the town's drinking water source was here. So how did it work back then? This was also, I should say, the city's first public water intake. Basically, what they would do is they would use hollowed out logs that led water down to Akershus fortress. For a fee, citizens could have branch pipes added to the water posts in their own courtyard. However, it was common for water to be filled with rotten sawdust coming from all of the sawmills further up the river. Not very nice. The yellow building that you can see straight ahead is called Gladsmøller. So this is a large wooden building from 1736, and it is actually the oldest preserved factory building and the only listed industrial building on the Akerselva River. So the building actually made paper, which is really interesting because today it is a printing house. So we can now see a little red house, and this house is known as the Hansa Louisa house. Why is that? Basically because it was an important literary figure in a play called The Kid. The Kid is a play about women and children who are working along the Akerselva River. That's also why you'll see a statue of a man. He was the one who campaigned for women's rights, and that's also why I'm going to show you some statues of women very soon. So anyway, the name has been associated with this building ever since the 1970s because it was used in a film adaptation from 1974. The play takes place in the industrial area along the river at the end of the 19th century, and there is an older woman called Hansa Louisa who takes care of single mothers. She gives the factory girls who are injured a roof over their heads so they can keep their children even if they are illegitimate children. The character represented a revolt against societal norms that existed around single mothers and their children in the 19th century. She didn't live in this house, but since the house was used in the film adaptation, it has become associated with the character. Today, that little red house is an amazing cafe, and they have some of the best waffles in Oslo. This factory that you can see is called Hula. So the founder of this company was Halvor Schau, who had been studying the brewing of beer in England. He came back to Norway, however, with plans to make a textiles factory. His factory became the largest textile factory on the Akerselva River. The factory supplied dresses, shirts, and bust clothes. It shut down in 1857. So straight ahead you can see the Industrial Workers Museum. This museum talks about Akerselva's labour and industrial history, and a little further away is an apartment on the address Sagaveien 8, which shows what the living conditions were like for the workers. So I really recommend visiting this museum if you're interested in how people lived in this area. So as we walk down alongside this waterfall, there is a factory on the right-hand side. I am going to try my best to say it correctly. The name of the factory is Voyens Bomuldspinderi. Sure. It was founded by a man called Knut Gra. It started in 1846 as a textile factory and lasted until 1955. At the time, the river had colour in it due to all the cloth dyeing. Even the rats were green, blue, or purple. If you go down the stairs on the west side, like what I'm doing, you can feel the splash of the water from the waterfall called Nedre Voyenfallene. So we are now in the neighborhood of Øvre Grünerløkka. So this was named after the mintmaster Friedrich Gruner, who owned the Nedrefoss mill. Grünerløkka was incorporated into Oslo in 1858. Before it became a part of Oslo, a neighborhood of affordable wooden houses was built here and was nicknamed New York. From 1861, the land was sold off to be developed. The district became an immigrant district, and many of the Jews who immigrated at the end of the 19th century settled here. Most immigrants came from Nordic countries. In recent time, it is Pakistanis and Turks who have left their mark on the district. Grünerløkka has always been popular with artists, and Edvard Munch has lived in Fossveien 7 and Thorvald Meyers Gata 48, which is now called Scouse Plus 1. In the latter, he painted two of his artworks called Sick Child and Spring.
Ja, okay.
So I am now walking under the Sanabreua Bridge. Brewer means bridge. Discharge from factories and sewage made the river a stinking puddle. It was the worst in the summer. It was not so bad on Sundays when the factories weren't operating, but it got so bad that the Conservatives proposed to put a lid on the river. The same year, the City Council decided that the river should be cleaner and that there should be parks. During the cleaning strikes in the 1920s, the bins were emptied into the river, and as late as 1962, there were 71 outlets from the public sewer system into the river. Thankfully, the river has now been cleaned. You can see as you're walking, the water is crystal clear, and a lot of the sewage, well, all of the sewage doesn't go into the river anymore.
Polemikken med William.
The bridge that we are now going to cross is called the Ormont Bridge. It is a suspension bridge from 1851 that used to be located in a different part of the city but was moved here in 1952. On the bridge there is an inscription that translates to 100 men I carry, but I fail during a steady march. We can now see part of the buildings for the Christiania Salduksfabrik. This was a factory that produced canvas and ropes and was founded in 1858. People made a pilgrimage here to look at the building because it was described as the second largest building in Oslo after Akershus Fortress. Today the Oslo Academy of Arts has moved to the factory, and if you walk close to where the Ormont Bridge was, you can see one of the college buildings. It is one of the best preserved industrial plants. The factory particularly made sails for sailing ships, but gradually expanded to fishing equipment, nets, ropes, and sacks. Most of the employees were women, and the working conditions were among the worst in the city. In 1908, there were 900 people working here. Production was discontinued in 1960 because there were cheaper textiles from other countries. The small building that you can see is the Aker's Mechanical Workshop that was established in 1841. The founder was a war captain called P.S. Steenstrup, who owned the factory until his death in 1863. He was the master of Norway's first steamship, the D.S. Constitution. Very fancy. He had built Karl Johans shipyard as the Navy's main shipyard. The company moved by the Oslo fjord in 1854 and grew into a shipyard. If you go down to Akerbrygga, the harbour area on the Oslo fjord, that is where the shipyard moved to. Today it is one of the biggest companies in Norway. It's a very well-known company, but it had its humble beginnings in this little half-timbered building by the river. The area that I'm now in is called Cuba, but why? One of the theories is that the name can be seen in connection with the wooden houses called New York that I mentioned earlier. It is a large circular square on the west side of the river that used to have a giant gas bell owned by the Oslo Gasverk. For a long time, gas was the competitor to electricity, and gas was used in streetlights. Gas was produced by heating up coal, and therefore there is a lighthouse here. The gas bell has been torn down, but the lighthouse is restored and has re-emerged as a cafe. Christiania was the second city in the Nordic region to have its own gasworks. The municipality took over the gasworks in 1878. The gas plant improved the city's street lighting, but it was also in demand for indoor lighting in factories, institutions, and in the wealthy homes. When electricity came, gas was outcompeted as an indoor light source. For private heating space, gas was of little importance. When the gas burner came for cooking in 1890s, gas was again in demand. During the 1920s, electric stoves became more common and street lighting was electrified. The last gas lantern disappeared in 1929. The Oslo Gasverk continued because many businesses preferred to use gas in production rather than electricity because gas heat was quicker. However, the gasworks was closed in 1976. The old company headquarters of Oslo Gasverk is in the street Storgata in the city centre and has a historic sign on it. Straight ahead you can see the silos, which is one of the icons of the Akerselva River. These silos belonged to Bjørnsen Valsemøller and were completed in 1953. In an architectural competition in the 1980s, it was proposed to turn it into a hotel, but instead the silos were taken over by a student organisation and turned into student housing. In 2002, it received the Oslo City Architecture Prize. If you look through the window in one of the first ones, you can see a tram, and that's to represent what the grain tram used to look like. I am now walking alongside Nedrefoss, or the lower waterfall. From ancient times, boats were able to come all the way up here. Today, only the fish can take the route at Nedrefoss. There are traces of what is perhaps the country's oldest mill operation. The monks from Høvedøya, an island in the Oslofjord, had a mill here, and that would have been in the 12th century. The mill was eventually taken over by the king after the Reformation in 1537, and was then named the King's Mill. The farm owned by Høvedøya Monastery was well located for business since the only bridge over the Akerselva was located here in old times. A fee was charged for crossing the bridge until 1865. In the early 17th century, farmers here were instructed to cut timber and drive it to the rising saw at Nedrefoss. The farm was called Kongens Mølle. So the farm was subdivided in 1668, and after that Frederick Gruner bought the farm. His surname gave name to the neighbourhood Grünerløkka. The family owned the property for extended periods of time. In 1801, farming was discontinued. Plans for dredging the river and establishing a harbour at Nedrefoss were discussed in the 1840s and 1850s. In the 1850s, Gruner subdivided 53 plots of land 30 metres south of the farm, and the wooden buildings known as New York were built. The silos were in operation here until the year 2000. I am now heading over the bridge towards Mudhollen, which is the food hall and the food market located here. This used to be an iron factory called the Vulcan Jernstøberi. Hope I said that correctly. It was established in 1873 and was a pioneer in Norway for the production of steel bridges. They also did other things, such as building the dome at the old Colosseum Cinema in Oslo. The factory closed in the late 1950s, and the buildings were then rented out for various businesses and office purposes. They have since been refurbished, and now there's a hotel here, tons of restaurants, the dance school, the School of Communications, and Mudhollen. The white building that you can see on the left-hand side is the oldest building in Grünerløkka. The main building is from 1802, however there has been a farm here since the Middle Ages when it was owned by the monastery on Høvedøya, later by the Gruner family, and most recently by the company Bjørnsen Valsemøller, which we talked about earlier. There have been mill operations here since the 13th century, and they lasted until 1985. The municipality bought the area around the waterfall to build one of Akerselva's greenest areas, which is what it is today. Very soon you'll see a bridge, and this is called the Grüne or the Grüne Bridge. This was the oldest bridge on the Akerselva River. Until the Vaterlandsbrua, which is at the end of this walk, was built in 1654, the Grüne was the only connection between east and west. The old name of the bridge was called Friese Bridge, Akers Bridge, and it was also called Møllebroen. Today the name is reflecting the Grüne family that owned the bridge. Historically, you had to pay tolls to get to the city, and this was the only bridge to get there. We are now approaching the artsy and the hipster part of Akerselva. One of the city's most popular concert venues, called Blå, is located here, and on Sundays there is a market with arts and crafts. Right by the bridge, someone has put up a sign that says Ingens Gata, which means no one's street. On the opposite side, you'll find a curved building that once housed Indigo, which was a factory for cloth dyeing. Further down is a culture house called Housemania that is very notorious in Oslo. There are older industrial buildings on both sides of the street. The left side has a huge complex that used to be a brewery and a food factory from 1855 to 1972. And at number 9, there has been a textile factory since the mid-1850s. But yeah, this area is known for concerts, markets, and bars.
Jeg kan ikke si det, så er det så kult, ikke sant?
Er det mye?
To the right, you can see the tower of the Jakob Church. This is the only listed church in Oslo that is not a medieval church. The church was consecrated in 1880 and is located in the former Akerselva cemetery, which was a cholera cemetery. The church was threatened with closure in the 1980s, but now it is a cultural church. We are now walking under a bridge called the Ankebrua, which is named after one of Oslo's richest family, the Anke family. This bridge is also nicknamed the Adventure Bridge. If you go to the top of it, there are bronze decorations from 1937, and they are characters from Norwegian folk tales. So we are now entering the last district for the Akerselva, which means we're getting close to the city centre. This place is called Waterland, which comes from the Dutch word waterland and refers to the water-stretched land at the mouth of the Akerselva River. Dutch schooners docked here to load timber in the 17th century. The first settlement here was older than Christiania, but the suburb was burned down by the governor in 1658. After the construction of the Waterland Bridge in 1654, it grew as an important gateway to the city. Waterland was a centre for peasant trade and also became a place for pubs, brothels and prisons. Waterland was the scene of organised crime well into the 20th century. Most of the buildings in the area were demolished at the end of the 1950s in connection with the construction of the metro between Tøyen and Jernbanetorget, or Oslo Central Station. Today, many big buildings at Waterland are here, and the old part is gone. I am now going under the Hausmannsbro, which is named after Lieutenant General Frederick F. Hausmann. The bridge is a cast iron bridge from 1892 and is worthy of protection and equipped with iron lace. It was built exceptionally solid because the city had procured an 18-ton modern steamroller that required a strong bridge. When the bridge was expanded to 5 lanes in the 1980s, they managed to copy the decoration and retain the bridge's appearance.
pero fíjate que...
We are now at the end of the walk at the Vortaland Bridge. So if you cross that bridge, you can see there to the right where all the trees are, that's the Vortaland Park, and that will take you towards Oslo city centre. Here's a little sign about Vortaland. But that marks the end of our walk. We've made it to the end of the Akerselva River. I really hope you enjoyed this walking tour, and if you wish to do this yourself, we have written a guide on how to do this with all of the information about the stops, and you can find that via the link in the description or on our website, thehiddennorth.com. Thank you so much.